Send me $5,000 or don't bother coming. I read that sentence once, then I read it again. My apartment was silent except for the low hum of the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, and I just sat there at my kitchen table with my phone in my hand, completely still. My sister had sent that message at 9:47 on a Thursday evening. Before I could even process it, the phone buzzed again. "You know you owe this family." I set the phone down on the table. I looked at the wall for a moment, I picked it back up, and then, without typing a single word in response, I took a screenshot. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it yet, but something in me, something trained by years of sitting in a legal office, organizing documents, watching attorneys build cases from small, careful details, understood instinctively that this message mattered, that the moment it was sent, the ground had shifted underneath my sister's feet, even if she couldn't feel it yet. She had no idea that those words, typed out in 30 seconds on a Thursday night, would eventually be printed on paper and placed on a table in a room with an attorney. She had no idea that her confidence would become her biggest liability. She had no idea that the story she thought she was writing had an ending she never imagined. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Olivia Carter, and I'm 34 years old. I want you to picture someone completely ordinary, because that's exactly what I am. I wake up early, I make coffee in a small kitchen with a window that faces the parking lot. I drive a car that's 7 years old and has a dent above the rear wheel that I've never bothered to fix. I work as a paralegal at a small legal office that most people in the city have never heard of. I eat lunch at my desk more days than not. I come home, I cook something simple, and I read or watch something before bed. I don't post vacation photos online because I don't take many vacations. I don't own anything that would make someone jealous. I live inside my means. I pay my bills on time, and I try very hard not to cause problems for anyone. That last part, trying to not cause problems, is something I learned early, growing up in a household where the rules were never written down, but always perfectly clear. My older sister Amanda was the favorite. I'm not saying that with bitterness anymore. I'm just saying it because it's true, and because it's the foundation of everything that came later. Amanda was the one who got praised at dinner. She was the one my parents pointed to when relatives asked how the family was doing. She was the one who received the loud, effortless affection that fills a room, while I received the quieter, more conditional kind, the appreciation that only appeared when I had done something useful, and I did a lot of useful things. I was the one who helped my father figure out his health insurance paperwork when the forms confused him. I was the one who drove my mother to her specialist appointments across town when Amanda was too busy. I was the one who quietly transferred money into my parents' account 3 times over 2 years without mentioning it to anyone, because I knew that mentioning it would create drama. I handled the administrative reality of our family, while Amanda handled the performance of it. The birthday dinners she organized but didn't fund. The Christmas gatherings she showed up to beautifully dressed but never helped clean up after. Nobody announced my contributions at the dinner table. Nobody auctioned off credit for the things I quietly held together. For most of my adult life, I told myself that was fine. I wasn't doing those things to be recognized. I did them because they needed doing. But the family had developed a particular habit over the years, the habit of treating my reliability as an endless resource. The assumption was always there, underneath every interaction. Olivia will handle it. Olivia will pay for it. Olivia will step up. And if Olivia doesn't step up immediately and without complaint, then Olivia is being difficult. I had never truly pushed back on that assumption, not once, until the Thursday night when my sister sent me a demand for $5,000 and threatened to bar me from my own parents' anniversary celebration if I refused. I wasn't rich. I had no secret savings account they didn't know about. I wasn't holding out on anyone, but I had something that years of working around attorneys and legal documents had quietly given me, something that turned out to be worth far more than money. I understood that evidence, organized and preserved and presented correctly, matters more than any emotional argument ever could. I wasn't glamorous. I wasn't powerful in any obvious way, but I had something they didn't expect, and I was patient enough to use it properly. If you've ever been in a family where your stability was treated as an obligation, where being responsible somehow meant you owed everyone around you something, then you already understand the texture of what I'm about to describe. Subscribe if that lands. Drop a comment if you've ever had a relative demand money from you with no real basis other than the fact that you had a job and they felt entitled to what you earned. Hit the like button or the hype button. It genuinely helps this reach people who need to hear it. The text arrived 2 days before the family reunion. The reunion had been in planning for 6 weeks. It was meant to celebrate my parents' anniversary, a milestone, a meaningful one, the kind of gathering that should have been warm and uncomplicated. Multiple relatives had already contributed financially to the event. The venue was booked, a catering arrangement had been confirmed. I knew this because I had spoken to 2 of my cousins earlier that week, and both of them had told me casually that costs were covered and everything was set, which is why my sister's demand for $5,000 made no logical sense from any angle, unless the money was never really about the reunion. I typed back a measured response. I told Amanda that I couldn't afford to send $5,000, that I was not in the financial position to do so, and that I hoped the reunion would be wonderful regardless. She replied in under 5 minutes, "You know you're the one with the steady job. Don't embarrass the family." There it was, the framing I had watched the family use my entire life. The idea that having a steady income meant having an endless obligation to everyone who didn't. The idea that stability was something to be taxed, not respected. I wrote back again, still politely, still without anger. I explained that a steady income did not mean I had $5,000 available to transfer, and that I would not be sending the money. Amanda's next message dropped all pretense. She told me that without a financial contribution, I would not be welcome at the reunion, that the family had expectations, that my refusal was a direct insult to my parents and everything they had built. I sat with that for a long moment. The ceiling fan turned above me. Outside, a car passed on the street below. The apartment was very quiet, and in that quiet, something inside me made a decision. I was going to that reunion. I was going to attend my parents' anniversary celebration because I had every right to be there, and I was going to document everything. The family group chat had already begun filling up by the time I put my phone down that night. I don't know exactly what Amanda told them, but the messages arriving were consistent in their tone, that I was being selfish, that this wasn't the time to make things difficult, that family loyalty meant something. Several relatives who had never once commented on my years of practical support were suddenly very vocal about my obligations. Nobody asked what the demand looked like. Nobody asked what had actually been said. The drive to the reunion 2 days later was 2 hours along a highway that cut through flat land and open fields. I drove with the windows down. The air smelled of late summer, dry grass, and something faintly sweet from a farm stand I passed somewhere around the halfway mark. I talked to myself quietly during the last 30 minutes, the way you do when you're preparing for something you know is going to be uncomfortable, but you've decided to walk into it anyway. When I arrived, the venue was already full and warm and noisy with the particular sound of a large family gathering, overlapping conversations, children running between adults, music playing at low volume underneath it all. I found my parents first, hugged them, told them they looked wonderful. They did. My mother was wearing a dress I hadn't seen before. My father looked relaxed in a way he rarely did. Amanda was across the room when I walked in. She was mid-conversation, animated and laughing, and when she spotted me, she smiled. It was a composed smile, practiced and precise, the kind that is designed to communicate something to witnesses without saying it out loud. I found a seat and stayed calm. About an hour into the event, during a natural pause in the energy of the room when most people had drifted toward the dining area, Amanda raised her voice to a level that was clearly intentional. "I just want everyone to know," she said, glancing in my direction with an expression of patient disappointment, "that not everyone here contributed equally to making today happen, but we're grateful they could join us." The room shifted. I felt the weight of it. Relatives turning slightly, eyes moving toward me, the specific discomfort of a room full of people who have just received a cue about who the problem is. I never agreed to pay anything. My voice was steady. Amanda tilted her head. The smile remained. "Then show everyone the message where you refused." She delivered that line like someone delivers a line they've rehearsed. She was certain I had nothing organized. She was certain I would flap. I didn't show the messages at that moment. The dinner table of a family reunion is not a courtroom, and I had enough legal common sense to know that the right evidence presented in the wrong setting accomplishes nothing. I simply looked at her for a moment, nodded slightly, and turned back to my plate. But I was thinking about that folder on my phone, growing, organized, timestamped, and I was thinking about the fact that every threatening message my sister had sent was still sitting in that folder, permanently recorded, waiting. The remainder of the weekend was a specific kind of unpleasant. Seats near me at meals filled up last, slowly, as though proximity to me had become something people needed to calculate. Conversations I entered went briefly quiet and then resumed in a different direction. My cousin, Diane, who I had always been close to, came and sat beside me Saturday afternoon and said, low and apologetic, that Amanda had told several people I had tried to sabotage the reunion, that I had deliberately withheld funds to make her look bad. I listened to that without reacting outwardly, though something in my chest went cold and tight. That evening, Amanda gave a toast. It was supposed to be for our parents, and it was, mostly, but nestled inside it, delivered with the kind of casual confidence that assumes no one will challenge it, was this: some people here believe that family loyalty comes with a price tag. The rest of us know better. A few people laughed, the uncomfortable, reflexive kind that happens when a room full of people doesn't know whether what they just heard was a joke or something else. I raised my glass with everyone else. I did not react. I did not give her what she was waiting for. Sunday afternoon, my mother found me in the garden behind the venue. It was quieter there. Birdsong, the distant sound of someone's child laughing through the open back doors, the smell of cut grass warming in the sun. My mother looked tired in the particular way of someone who has been managing tension all weekend and doesn't want to admit it. "Olivia," she said quietly, "just send the money and end all of this." I looked at her carefully before I answered. "Mom, she sent the demand before the reunion even started. Before any of this happened, she told me to send $5,000 or not come." Those were her exact words. My mother's expression didn't shift the way I'd hoped. It softened, but in the direction of sympathy for the wrong person. "Amanda wouldn't do something like that," she said. That sentence closed something between us that weekend. Not forever, but for that day, definitively. The version of events my mother had accepted was already settled. Nothing I said in that garden on that afternoon was going to unseat it. I nodded. I went back inside, and I kept my phone close. After the reunion ended and everyone returned to their regular lives, I assumed the pressure might ease. It didn't. Amanda texted me twice in the following week. She referred to what I owed as a family debt. She told me that people were talking. She told me that my behavior had consequences. One message read, without any cushioning whatsoever, "You still owe this family. Everyone knows it. It's only a matter of time before you do the right thing." I saved every message. I backed up every screenshot. I built a timeline, not obsessively, but methodically, the way a paralegal organizes a file that might eventually be reviewed by someone with authority. Then came the voice message. She sent it through a messaging app, her tone casual and almost bored, like she was reminding me to return a library book. She repeated the demand. She mentioned the embarrassment I had caused. She said she expected to hear from me before the end of the month. I transcribed the key portions of that voice message and saved the audio file separately. Amanda was growing more confident the longer the silence continued. I think she interpreted my lack of emotional response as weakness, as the beginning of surrender. She had run this playbook before, probably, in smaller ways, and it had always eventually worked because I had always eventually absorbed the pressure and gone along to keep the peace. She didn't know that this time, the silence on my end was not surrender, it was preparation. There are things you learn working alongside experienced attorneys that don't come from a textbook or a training manual. You learn them by watching, by organizing case files and understanding why each document matters, by seeing how a carefully preserved record can completely reverse the apparent power dynamic in a dispute. You learn that the loudest person in a conflict is almost never the strongest one. You learn that patience is not passivity, and you learn that documentation assembled correctly and preserved carefully is the most powerful argument that exists in any formal setting, because it doesn't have a bad day, it doesn't get nervous under pressure, and it cannot be talked over or dismissed as an opinion. I spent 2 evenings that week reading about the legal definitions of coercion and financial extortion. I wasn't assuming, I was educating myself. I wanted to understand where the line was before I decided what to do about the fact that I believed we were well past it. Amanda sent another message that settled the question. Send the money or I'll tell everyone how selfish you are. Don't test me. I read it, saved the screenshot, labeled the file, and added it to the folder. And then I said out loud to no one but myself and the quiet of my apartment, what they didn't know was that every message they sent became another piece of evidence. I had decided by that point not to confront the family directly. That battlefield was not one I could win. The narrative had been built too carefully. The audience was too invested in their version of events. The only arena where the truth carried weight was one where evidence was the primary language and emotion was irrelevant. I needed to move this into that arena. I asked my boss, Rebecca, if I could have a private conversation with her after work one evening. She said yes immediately. Rebecca was a seasoned attorney, the kind who had been practicing long enough that almost nothing surprised her and almost nothing rattled her. She listened more than she talked, which in my experience is the mark of someone who genuinely understands what they're doing. We sat in her office after hours. The building was quiet around us. The room had a particular smell I had always associated with serious, careful work. Old paper, faint coffee, the leather of her desk chair. I placed my phone on the desk and let her scroll through the messages from the beginning. She read everything without interrupting. When she reached the final message, she set the phone down and looked at me. Olivia, she said, her voice deliberate and calm. What's described in these messages could legally be considered extortion. Hearing it said that plainly by someone who understood the law was like a key turning in a lock. Rebecca told me to continue collecting every communication, to avoid responding to Amanda emotionally or with anything that could be interpreted as provocation, to keep my replies minimal and neutral. She told me to let Amanda keep sending messages. She explained that the more she pushed, the stronger the documentation became. Amanda kept pushing. She threatened to expose me to the extended family. She told 2 cousins I stole from a fund that didn't exist. She sent another message repeating the original demand, this time framed as a final warning. She seemed to believe that the combination of social pressure and time would break me down the way it always had. If she sends one more demand with a threat attached, Rebecca said during our second conversation, we take this into a formal setting. The message arrived on a Tuesday. It was unambiguous. It was documented. It was exactly what we needed. I took the final screenshot. I looked at the completed folder, organized, time-stamped, comprehensive, and I felt something settle deep in my chest. Not anger, not satisfaction, something quieter, the feeling of being prepared. We arranged the meeting through a mutual contact of the family, describing it simply as a space to resolve a dispute. Amanda was told to come to a professional office address on a Thursday afternoon. I'm sure she assumed this was the moment Olivia finally caved. I'm sure she drove there with rehearsed words already forming, gracious but firm, willing to let me apologize if I was sincere about it. She walked through the door unhurried, confident in the specific way of someone who has already mentally celebrated winning. I was seated at the table. Rebecca was seated beside me, composed, with a folder of printed documents in front of her and a pen resting on top of it. Amanda's eyes went from me to Rebecca, and something small but visible shifted in her posture. Just a fraction, just enough. Finally ready to make things right, she said. It was bravado, but it was the last easy moment she had in that room. Rebecca introduced herself by name and title. Attorney, Olivia's legal representative. The smile on Amanda's face didn't disappear immediately. It thinned, then it stiffened, then it became something else entirely. Rebecca opened the folder. She placed the printed screenshots on the table one at a time, face up, precisely, without hurry. The first demand, the follow-up about embarrassing the family, the threat before the reunion, the messages after, the voice message transcript, the final warning. She walked through each one methodically, identifying the language and explaining its legal significance, what coercion looks like when it's documented, what financial extortion requires in terms of evidence, and what the standard is for establishing intent. Amanda tried to laugh. She called it family pressure. She said it wasn't serious. She said people say things when emotions are running high, and it doesn't mean anything. Rebecca slid another printed document across the table. Timestamps, full transcripts, a formal legal analysis of each communication, each one annotated. Intent matters, Rebecca said, without raising her voice, and these messages clearly show intent. The room went completely quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight behind it. Amanda looked at the documents, she looked at me, she looked back at the documents. I watched her run through her options in real time, the arguments forming and dissolving, each one collapsing against the printed reality sitting on the table between us. She tried I was joking. She tried I was under stress. She tried a revised version of events in which the messages meant something different from what they plainly said. Each attempt came apart against the timestamps and the exact words sitting on the table between us. Rebecca explained that Olivia retained the right to file a formal complaint, that the documentation was sufficient, that the next step was entirely within Olivia's decision. I had stayed quiet through all of it. When I finally spoke, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The work had already been done. You humiliated me in front of my entire family, I said. At our parents' anniversary, you made me the villain of a story you wrote yourself. For money I never agreed to give you, that the reunion never needed in the first place. Amanda looked at me. She started to speak. I let the pause hold. I didn't come here to punish you. I came because what you did was wrong, and because at some point someone in this family had to say so with something more than feelings. I came with evidence. Amanda signed the written statement before she left the room. She acknowledged making the financial demands. She acknowledged the threatening language. She agreed in writing to end all financial harassment and all contact related to the matter. Her signature sat at the bottom of the page, next to the date, next to the words she had chosen to put in text messages on ordinary evenings, never imagining they would be organized and used against her. She left without looking back. The door closed. The room exhaled. I didn't go back to the group chat. I didn't send a message to the family announcing what had happened. I didn't need to. The truth has a way of circulating when the story built on top of it begins to crack. Over the following weeks, relatives began reaching out individually. Some had seen the messages, or at least heard about their content, and what they heard didn't match the version of events Amanda had sold them. A few apologized quietly and without ceremony. Some said nothing, which I found I could accept. An apology is good, but it is not required for clarity. Clarity has its own value. Amanda's position in the family quietly shifted, not because anyone announced it, but because the narrative she had built required no one to look too closely at her version of events. And once people started looking, the structure underneath didn't hold. I spent some time sitting with everything that had happened before I understood how I actually felt about it. What I found wasn't bitterness. There was no triumph either, or at least not the loud kind. What there was, clearly and persistently, was clarity. I understood, finally and completely, that my reliability had been treated as a resource by people who hadn't earned the right to draw from it without limit. I understood that keeping peace had cost me repeatedly over years in ways I had normalized because it was easier than the alternative. The alternative, as it turned out, was this: patient, documented, precise, not emotional, not loud, effective. My work at the office felt different after that, not because the work itself changed, but because I walked into it differently. I had used what I'd learned in that building, at that desk, in years of careful document work to protect myself when it mattered most. That changes how a place feels. It changes how you feel inside it. Rebecca never made a big moment of it. She was professional and matter-of-fact, as she always was. But one afternoon, a few weeks after the meeting, she stopped by my desk and said simply, "You handled that well, Olivia." She moved on. That was enough. For the first time in a long time, maybe for the first time ever, I wasn't the quiet one bending herself into a shape that fit everyone else's comfort. I was the one who understood her own ground, stood on it, and held it. For the first time in years, I wasn't the quiet one trying to keep peace. I was the one who protected herself, and that made all the difference. If your family has ever treated your financial stability as an obligation to them, if someone has ever made you feel like you owed your presence, your paycheck, or your silence, then you know the exact weight of that. It doesn't announce itself as manipulation. It wears the language of family and loyalty and love, and that is precisely what makes it so difficult to name, and so important to name when you finally do. Share your story in the comments below. Every single one gets read. Subscribe if you believe that calm, documented, patient accountability is its own form of power, because it is, and hit hype to put this story in front of someone who might be sitting in their apartment right now, reading a message that doesn't feel right and wondering what they're supposed to do next. You have options. You always have options. Did this hit somewhere close? Leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and click hype to help this reach the people who need it. The ones carrying this weight quietly. The ones who have been told for years that speaking up makes them the difficult one. You're not difficult. You're done. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here.